super premium everyday camera comparison initial reactions. So let me start this video off by saying this is an initial reactions video. I just got my hands on the Q3 today and have only shot around a little bit with it. So this is very much an initial impression, not a full review. Similarly, I've only had the Sony a7CR for a little bit of time and rented the 28mm lens to compare it to the 28mm lens permanently attached on the Q3. In terms of handling, my initial impression is that the Sony camera actually wins out. This grip is pretty nice. It's a pretty good size. You can attach the bigger grip to the bottom of it if you want to, so your pinky is also on some grip. And it has a pretty nice purchase. Of all the everyday carry cameras that I've tried in the last few weeks, including the Nikon ZF and the Fuji X-T5, I would say that this has the best grip, at least for my fat sausage-fingered hands. I really like the way this feels with the lens and attached to this camera. You kind of have a nice two-handed shooting situation here, and this bigger like a lens, even with the adapter, just kind of fits nice to the hand. The focusing tab fits right there. You can do it like this or like this, and the aperture ring is right there. It's a very nice tactile experience. And with this Summilux lens, man, the aperture ring is just perfectly tuned. So is that focusing tab. It just doesn't get any better than this in terms of just shooting experience and tactile experience. I think with the Q3, you would need a thumb support or something else to carry it. This is okay, but I think the thumb support makes it something that makes it much easier to carry, maybe even the grip. Otherwise, this really is kind of like the Nikon ZF in that you're probably going to wear this with a strap and carry it like this rather than in your hand all day. And I shoot with the camera in my hand more often. That's what I prefer. So in terms of handling, I'm giving it to the Sony here. With this 28mm Leica lens on it, it's the Summilux, the f1.4. You can see that there. It is a little bit heavier than the Q3, but not by much. I'll put the weights up here somewhere so you can see the difference. However, this is obviously an interchangeable lens camera. So you could actually put other lenses on this camera that would actually make it much lighter than the Q3. For example, one of these little Sigma contemporary guys, 24mm or 45mm. It's about the same size as that Leica lens, but weighs about a quarter of it. Again, I'll put the weight of the camera plus the lens up here so you can kind of see the difference. The Q3 also has a very nice tactile experience, but I believe this is focused by wire, so it's not quite as nice, it's not quite as tuned as the Summilux, but you would only notice when you're playing with the two side by side. Still a wonderful tactile experience with this. Plus, this has this cool macro feature. So you turn the ring here, and you can see the distance scale actually changes so you can shoot macro. I believe the new version of the 28mm Summilux that Leica just released also has macro focusing, but that lens wasn't available for rent when I got these things in. The menus on the Q3 are way better than the Sony. Also, the sort of landing screen for the menus is basically perfect on these Leicas. The only thing I would change is that it was transparent so you could see the image while you were changing these settings. But otherwise, the Leica menu is just a dream. I still think it's the best in the business. I think it's more comprehensive and easier to use than even the Hasselblad menu, for example. A couple of other places these cameras are different. The Q3 has a much nicer viewfinder. I believe it's 5.6 dots. It's quite large for this size of a camera. A big improvement over the Q2's viewfinder. Also, much better than the 3-point-something tiny little viewfinder on this guy. I think that's one of the tricks Sony really missed. They should have put the Q3's viewfinder in this camera, the a7CR. The other difference between these cameras is the back screens. The Q3 only has a tilting screen, and it doesn't really tilt all the way up, although it is very sturdy feeling. I like that they put a metal bar all the way through here. On the other hand, the a7CR has a flip-out screen, which is great, but now I've gotten spoiled with seeing the A7R5 screen that has both the tilt out and the flip out, and I feel like they should have put that in this camera as well. And then, of course, the button layout. Leica has this wonderful shutter dial here, very tactile to be able to move your shutter speed, which is fantastic. I love that. I do wish it also had an ISO dial, maybe even an ISO compensation dial, but it does have a spinny dial that you could assign either aperture or ISO. I just wish it had one more dial so you could have all three at your fingertips here. The Sony camera has the usual PASM dial, which is fine, but I would prefer the shutter speed dial like the Q3 personally. I think that adds to the tactile experience. Also, the Sony has these nice dials in the back and front of the camera, whereas the Q3 does not for changing aperture or ISO or shutter speed. A small difference, but the Q3 has the threaded hole here for a shutter release cable. That's a really nice touch. Also, you can't see it in the cameras, just on the video here, but this camera has a leaf shutter, whereas this has a mechanical shutter. I'll put the maximum sync speed for this leaf shutter versus the mechanical shutter of this guy. I believe this is 1/250th. I think this is 1/2000, but I'll put the correct numbers on the screen here, up there somewhere. These cameras share quite a few weaknesses, as a matter of fact. Neither camera has a joystick, which I think is totally nuts. Both camera only takes one battery, which is normal. Both cameras only take one memory card slot, which I think is nuts. I feel like on both of them, it looks like there's space for two memory cards, especially on the Sony. I feel like they just left out a memory card slot here. It also irks me that they didn't put the dual USB type A and B card slot in here. That's crazy for a premium camera like this one, or a more expensive camera than a base model camera. So, I think this is going to be a tough one. I love Leica cameras. The build quality is second to none. The shooting and user experience is the best in the business. For me, using Leica cameras always feels like coming home. They're so easy to use. They're so photography focused and forward, and they've thought of all kinds of things that other cameras don't have. Another thing is that this has highlight blinkies. This doesn't. It only has zebras, which I just don't like as much. That's zebras is a video feature, highlight blinkies is a photo feature, and maybe that's kind of the difference between these cameras. They both shoot video, but this feels still like more of a photo camera, whereas this feels like more of a hybrid camera that kind of does both and makes some compromises to do both. So again, this is initial impression review. I'm not ready to make a call quite yet. I want to spend at least the weekend shooting with these and feeling them out. But my initial impression is that if you love the Leica brand like I do, if you love the 28mm focal length, which I don't necessarily, and you think you could sort of use the 28mm focal length as your everyday length all the time, man, this camera is probably the perfect camera for you. They've really done it. It's got the USB-C charging now, and a nice side port, which I think is better than the M11 setup, where it's in the bottom. I like it on the side so much better. Not a full-size HDMI part, but what are you going to do? Neither camera has that. But yeah, I mean, really just a perfect package. USB-C charging, wonderful lens, wonderful shooting experience, the leaf shutter, just a fabulous camera. You can see why this is the crack of gateway drugs into the Leica ecosystem. It's just a fun camera to shoot with. It just feels good. It feels like coming home when you're shooting this camera. On the other hand, the Sony has a much better grip, a much worse viewfinder, arguably a better back screen, and then of course I'm adapting this lens, so it's only manual focus, but it's an adapted lens. That means I could take this lens off and put an autofocus lens on this. Maybe not as good quality as this one, but I could have a 35mm focal length, which for me is a better everyday carry focal length, personally. I'll take 24 or 35 over 28 any day of the week. Also, you can make this a very light setup with a $200 35mm Samyang lens, and there's just this, and it weighs way less than the Q3. So it just gives you many more options. This really is 2 or 3 different cameras, a video camera and a photo camera, a manual focusing beast, and an autofocusing master all in one. Although the autofocus in the Q3 seems pretty good. It seems much improved with the phase detect autofocus. More to come on that point for sure. And then, of course, the price. The Sony camera is about $3,000 body only. This lens is like almost $8,000 new. So this setup, if you wanted to get it with the $20 or $30 adapter, this full C Leica adapter works great. Nice and tight. you're looking at something like $11,000 or $12,000, right? Whereas the Q3 comes in at about $6,000 new, although they're hard to find now, so you might end up overpaying and paying closer to $7,000 to get one if you don't want to wait on a waiting list. And you get the same focal length, almost the same aperture, 1.7 versus 1.4. So really kind of a steal of a deal. You're getting like the lens on sale plus a camera body, but then you can't change the lens off this camera body. I would also say this Summilux is a better lens. The little bit of shooting I've done with these two, and I'll put a couple of quick image samples up here, does show me that I think this lens does render a little more nicely. It's got a little more character than this guy, maybe even resolves a little bit better. But like, as you can see from these image samples, it's really close. I mean, if I didn't label these two images, I don't think you'd be able to pick out in a lineup which one was the Sony, which one was the Leica. Clearly the same sensor, very similar cameras. So yeah, for me, really it's just coming down to the fact that you can change the lens on this guy, even though it has a worse viewfinder, even though it's not the Leica experience. The menu is terrible on the Sony, honestly. It's better than it was, but it's still no Leica menu. It's still no premium Leica experience, So you get a little bit of a Mutaka, mutant, redheaded stepchild of an experience with this. But man, when you get this lens on this camera, I'm kind of thinking it's close enough. You got the aperture ring, you got the focusing tab. It's close. It's close. So more to come. Let me know what you think. Would you keep the Q3? Would you go out and buy the 28mm and just rock this setup, even though it's going to burn a big hole in your pocket? Is all of this just a huge waste of money, and I should get a Samyang lens on this Sony and just leave it at that? Love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. More on this soon. See you in the next one. Bye.